Hey guys, so today we're going to do a little more stuff with the warp function and how it sort of applies differently to text than it applies to images. So I've got these posters pulled up from an event from Mixed Martial Arts from a couple of years ago, and they had these series of posters where they had this text written on these people's faces, basically just, some of their quotes from the, upcoming fight, the promotions they were doing and stuff. So it was a big event, 200 being a big number, lots of championship events. Anyways, it was a pretty popular ad campaign. Everyone was a big fan of these little posters here, cool stuff. Can't show you all of them. Anyways, we're going to do something kind of like that, maybe not necessarily doing all this stuff here. Basically what I thought we would do is just kind of, find like a poem or a quote or something to do with that, and find a image that you could use on like Pixabay. So in this case, I found just a portrait of this girl here, and when I cut her out, I was sort of making sure that I wasn't really focusing too much on this wispy hair on the sides here, because I was going to crop it down to make sure her face was sort of dominant here. So let me just show you kind of what I got here. So this was how I cropped it, and then I kind of added a little layer mask here for this, and from here with a black background, we can kind of turn her black and white. So go ahead and find your headshot, find your portrait right here, crop it down, and then when you are done cropping it, go to image and say image size, and just double check that it's at least 2,000 pixels wide. So when I cropped it down, it might have been somewhere in the neighborhood of like, say, like 1,000, maybe a little less pixels wide, especially when it's only 300 pixels per inch. I think it might have been like 3 inches wide. So I wanted it to be a bit bigger, just so the text would be a little bit clearer, despite the fact that it might have altered the resolution slightly. It wasn't so bad. So before we do this, I just wanted to explain a couple things about sort of changing this into black and white. We could do a number of things. We could go to our adjustments layer, and we could find hue and saturation, and we could just sort of like bring the saturation down, right, to, nothing, right? That would make it black and white. No, that's very clear. However, there is another adjustment layer. It's called just black and white, and it actually allows you to kind of like balance out what colors get made the most made the darkest, right? In this case, reds. It's a very warm picture, it being fall with the sun setting, so that turning the reds down makes everything a good deal darker. Turning the reds up makes everything a good deal paler. I'll pull it down just a little bit just to get some contrast going on. The yellows mostly affect her hair. If you want to pull her, make highlights in her hair, that's one thing you could do. I might pull it down some, just to kind of hide some of the stuff here or there. And this you can kind of see the sort of shine on her hair. If I pull the cyans up, her eyes get a little bit brighter. Same thing with the blues. I pull the blues up, her eyes get brighter still. So that might be something worth it. So experiment with this, depending on what kind of what you're looking for in terms of the sort of look you're going for in terms of the contrast. That's a fun little tool. Okay, so let's start off with just this poem I found by Emily Dickinson, which is about the fall. I thought it was a fitting just by virtue of it being fall. Now I went ahead and I found a font on dafont.com, and if you want to find a new font, that's fine. Otherwise, I really suggest, and this is just by experience, I really suggest that you find something that fits well with all caps. These scripty fonts don't really work well with all caps. You can find some handwritten fonts which are fun. These sort of like rounded off fonts. These might work. The cinematography might work. All that stuff. You want something that's all caps, and you want something that's somewhat thick. You don't want something very wispy, because when we do these warp things, it's going to really alter the shape of these letters, and if the letters are dependent on sort of being easy to read, then it's not going to work. So this right here is very readable, and that's the name of the game, is readable. So let me just real quick change this back to Garden Grow Us. Here we go, and we will. Okay, so I want to say, so the poem goes something like this: the morns are weaker than they were. Okay, so I'll just kind of walk you through how I do this. To start off with, I went ahead and I want to just make one of the words a good deal bigger than everything else. And whenever you do that, of course, you have to also alter the leading of the word as well. So just make that as even as you can. And this will allow us to fit this in. Now, before I do anything else, I want to make sure that I've got this as big as I want it to be. I want it to be bigger slightly than the space I'm going to fit it into. Now, in this case, I'm going to fit it onto her forehead. So I'm going to warp it to sort of like fit the planes of her forehead, like around her hairline and above her eyebrows. So if I were to just go over here and just right-click on this, after engaging the transformation tools and say warp, you would notice that I have nothing really happens down here. I have the option of choosing several of these options here of like arcing it or arcing the lower part of it, bulging it out, which might fit here, might work if I were to do bulge here, but not really. It wouldn't really fit quite as well. So I'm just going to hit this little no smoking symbol here. What I want to do first is I want to rasterize this type to make it into just a series of pixels that I can then warp. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to say rasterize type, and then I'm going to right click it again, I'm going to say convert to smart object. Now I want to say I could have probably just converted to smart object beforehand, but it's okay. So once I am there, now what's great about converting it to a smart object is that I can now make these changes, and then I can go back to them, and I can do. Now nothing's going to show up over here like it is with Puppet Warp, but it will allow us to. So once again, right click on it, press Warp, and you get this little grid. This might seem familiar to those of us who recall working with Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, and it's very it's somewhat similar, except where you can't grab little points and just sort of it's not quite as exact, right? So basically you're working with this grid here, and you can kind of move the various like intersections, the vertices here, but beyond that, you're kind of limited to sort of just moving the corners and moving these little handles here. So the handles basically affect the position of the little grids on the inside, and the anchor points here kind of affect the corners. So I'm going to sort of like try to like fit this inside here, and I can you notice it's going to compress these things. And we'll just sort of adjust this. And once you have this adjusted, from there you want to start messing with the anchor points to see if you can't make it as readable as possible. So I'll see if I can't kind of drag this out here. And I don't want to have too much like vertical differences between these two. Let's see. I wanted to interfere with the hair. All right, neat. Okay. Just probably maybe even pull this a little bit further this way. I don't want it to try. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. I'll press enter. Now once again, because it's a smart object, if I right click on this, if I engage the transformation and I right click on it and I press warp again, it'll have the same sort of setup, and I can just make some minute adjustments. If I don't make it into a smart object, then that's not going to work. Last thing I'll do is I'll just right click on this, and I will say, let's look here. I'll just say blending options, and I'll do layer via copy. No, layer via copy. I'll do I'll do color overlay, and from there you can kind of decide what color you'd like it to be, right? And so in this case, maybe a fall color, like a sort of a dark red, reddish orange, rusty color might work, and then from there, press OK. You could even just attempt to change the blending option to something like multiply or maybe even overlay, which would allow it to kind of blend in a bit better with the other stuff. I'm not sure that really much happened here, but that's okay. All right. So lastly, so essentially what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing to each plane of the face, but every time you put in the leaves are turning brown, right? Once again, you're going to make sure that you emphasize whatever you want to emphasize and make your paragraph as interesting and readable as possible. It's a little bit centering your text is very advantageous. In this case, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller just so I can. I might want to like. Space this out a bit more. Just a bit. Okay. I'll shrink this down to fit onto her cheek, and then I'll warp it to the cheek. But once again, every single time you do this, in fact, you could probably even make an action to automate this, which I'll do right now. I'll have this little action button. If you don't have this, you can just go to Window, Actions, and just press Record here, or press New, and call it Smart Rasterize and Convert to Smart Object, right? And then what we can do now is we can go click on our layer, and we can right click on it. we can rasterize the type, and then we can convert to smart object. And so that will allow us to kind of like automate that. And then I can press stop. And so now if I have another piece of text over here, for instance, the berries. Okay. Just like this to kind of like shrink down some. Oops, wrong. All right. Okay. Resize this. And then from there, I can just do my little action here again. Just press play. And now it is a rasterized smart object. And so I can right click on it and do the same warp as I did before. So I'll just jump ahead. I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to open up this thing over here, open recent. And I'll open up PSD here. Oops, first off. File, open recent. PSD. So I went ahead and did this beforehand, and so you can kind of see what we're looking at. We can kind of see that what I did later was I actually grouped them together. Let me just delete this this layer mask for now. I grouped them together, and what I did was I put a layer mask on this onto this group, and then I used my spatter brush to just sort of like erase parts of the text. So that's the idea. So once again, let's get at least 4 different blocks of text for like a quote or a poem or a song or something that you'd like to do, and just like place it on their face and just warp the text to go along with that. Just using that technique of rasterizing the object, converting it to a smart object, and then altering it just to fit the planes of the face. You can kind of see the horns are weaker than they were, the leaves are turning brown, the berries' cheeks are plumper, the rose is out of town. That's an Emily Dickinson poem about the fall. So isn't that nice? Okay, cool. Well, okay, so can't wait to see you guys produce. See you in class.